Oh hey, welcome to part 9. Today we're going to see how I made 16 tenons. Some curves on some legs, some curves underneath the feet, the trestle ties, grooves, all sorts of good stuff. It was a lot of fun. This is about a 20-minute video that covers about 15 hours worth of work, so hope you enjoy. The first thing we're going to do is make these feet. So I've got to make a 1/2 inch radius at the bottom of each leg, and I'm clamping them together with a 1 inch drill bit to bore out the hole and get two opposing 1/2 inch holes. So this is a Woodall 1 inch auger bit. It's a real nice bit. It sort of guides through the wood. The problem I'm going to run into is these clamps. These DeWalt clamps aren't enough to stop the bit from prying apart, so I kind of realized that. I'm going to switch over to some pipe clamps. And now the part I'm worried about is, can I keep that bit straight? We'll find out that's harder than it seems, so tried to square it up. We'll go into fast forward here. And my result was not all that great. Flipped it over and drilled from both sides. Did the best I could do to keep it square, plumb. But right here we can see they're kind of like not very good. But I'm going to make up for it on the sander. It's actually not a problem at all. Came out pretty good. Just looking at it, like, those are not very straight. But now we're going to take it to the bandsaw and cut out the midsection there. The arcs were just to give it an arch up, and now we got to get rid of the bulk of the material. So I really don't like this bandsaw, so I'm staying way off the line, and I'll just sand it to make up the difference. But it's not too bad. It's just a little piece. Do both legs. I'm going to bring it to I've got a little baby oscillating spindle sander that's going to just clean that up and make it look real nice. Fix all the arcs. And that's that little oscillating spindle sander. And just really, I spent about an hour doing the sanding on these. I'm just showing it here fast forward, but got it to a pretty good result. Changed it and tried different size drums. It comes with different size, so went to a bigger one to try to take more bulk. I think those are 60 grit. And just, take your time, you'll get there. Not quite a big enough job to set up a router jig or anything like that. Kind of didn't take too long. Going back to the little tiny one to work on those arcs. And there's going to be one more part to finish up on these legs, and there's an arch that goes across the top on the sides. So once I get these cleaned up, we'll move over to the bandsaw and we'll work on those arcs. The very visible part. So here we are trying to figure out this bandsaw that I don't like, how we're going to create the arches on top of the legs. It's got actually a little step down first, I think it's a 1/4 inch step down, and then it arcs to the base. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting that square piece out, and then we'll work on the arch piece, which is exactly what a bandsaw is good for. Just took my time. Didn't want to ruin these legs. I spent a lot of time making them, getting them true 4x4. So Watch your fingers. Okay, so that's the square piece, and now we've got to arch it. A nice little curve. I'm going to fast forward here. Got it marked up pretty good. Just take my time. And it really wasn't that bad at all. Got them cut out, and then a little bit of sanding, and they look really good. We'll see them here in a minute. The finished product. There's two feet. Just getting better at it on the second one. The second side. This is the second leg. Pretty much know what I'm doing now. Put the shoulder and then arcing. I guess I could move the bandsaw blade down. There it is. There's the two legs, the 2 feet, pretty much finished. Pretty nice accomplishment. It feels like an accomplishment to get those done, and I'm happy with the result. Now we're on to the gable ties and all of the tenons that I need to cut. I'm making the face cuts on all 4 sides to the right depth. That was pretty simple, kind of fun. Now that all the faces are cut for the tenons, I moved over to this tenoning jig. I bought it specifically for this. I didn't have a tenoning jig. I don't have a lot of good fences or anything, and this was, I don't know, less than $200. And the beauty of this is you're making pretty intricate cuts, but it's got 2 handles on it, and your hands don't get near the blade. So say $180, that's worth it to have that extra precaution and that extra safety. I see some people try to like hold their hands down next to the blade, and that's just asking for trouble, especially for me without a lot of experience with a table saw. I don't want my hands anywhere near that, especially this blade's up, 2.5 inches. So it actually is a nice tenoning jig. My only complaint is that once you get to wider lumber, anything over like 3 inches, it's no good for. Except I found a way to be able to clamp up in the front of it. If I put a bunch of clamps on, then I can get some stable thick boards through with that. But I don't know, maybe maybe they make tenoning jigs for larger stock. Like this board here, I was trying to figure it out, and I figured, well, I can at least clamp it, still use the handles, and it's still pretty safe. So it all worked out good. Now that I got the little tenons cut with the jig and the table saw, now I've figured out how to cut like 7.5 inch tenons, and that's with a router. So I bought a piece of plexiglass and built the Samurai Carpenter jig there. You can see it's just bolted to the router, and take off like 1/4 inch out on the leading edge, and then get it down to the 1/2 inch, and then move up, do another 1/3 of the tenon until I get all the way up to the shoulder. That stop at the top, I measured it, my bit's exactly 5.5 inches away from the plexiglass end, so I just put a stop at 5.5 inches, and I get a really crisp, clean line. So I was really dreading how I was going to cut those tenons, because I did not trust the bandsaw for that, nor my table saw doesn't have the depth. So I ended up with the router, going with the router, and I'm really glad I did. When I got done with those 7.5 inch tenons, I put a precision measurer on there, and I was within 0.02 of an inch on the thickness of the tenons, and that's pretty good given that I'm routing from both sides to reach that tenon. So yeah, that really worked well, and I would have been lost without that fence. That's a great $20 tool, and you'll see here in a minute I'm going to use it for even better purposes too. So I ended up with really, really good tenons. Unbelievable. So here's the result. Nice and clean, nice shoulder, crisp, flat, just what I wanted. So that was cool. Here's just another couple close-ups just to get to see the result. Definitely use a router. So another use of the router, I have to cut that angle and curve and all out of the trestle ties, so I set up the router and a fence, started working on those. Worked out pretty well. Okay, so here's a view of how this jig works. I made this router sled. It's not a sled, but this router, this piece of plexiglass, 12 by 12, 3/8 thick. Followed the Samurai Carpenter's video on this, and it's been very helpful. I've been able to route these very long, like 7-inch tenons on 3 sides. And after doing that, you know, and weren't worrying about the accuracy of the tip, did the table tip or whatever, I've got it within 2 100ths of an inch, which is pretty darn good for roughing in a tenon. Much better than if I would have attempted to put these long boards through the bandsaw or the table saw. So I got nice clean shoulders, really good result. And with this maple, it doesn't tear out so much. So it really ended up with a really clean and crisp result. Now, what I have to do here is make a 1/2-inch groove along each of these, the tops of these trestle ties. And it needs to be 3/8 down, needs to be 3/4 inch thick, and I need to go a 1/2 inch deep. And so the router is the good choice for this. On the short pieces, I used the table saw because these short pieces actually wouldn't be that stable for routing anyway. So I just used the table saw and just took, you know, 15 passes and just ate away that groove. But this is the sort of the sibling groove. And anyways, I need to, so what I've only got a 1/2 inch router, but I got 1/2 inch and I've got inch. So I need to make a 3/4 inch groove. So I put the 1/2 inch in. I'm gonna have to do 2 passes, but to get it steady, this is where this this fence comes into play, is I will set it up so that I've got these guide rails. And now I need to get this 3/8 away from one end. So what I've got these setup blocks. So there's a 3/8, and I can set this 3/8 in here. Get that fade all the way out, and that gives me 3/8. So I'm gonna, the reason for all those holes around the end is so that you can screw these blocks in. So I'm gonna do that, and then set the other side of the fence up so it rides on the other end of the board, and I should have a nice flat, consistent go. So let me set that up, I'll come back in a minute. Okay, so here's the setup. I put the 2 fences on. You see how that's gonna slide real nice, real steady. And since I gotta go down 1/2 inch, I'm doing about 1/4 inch on one pass, and then I'll bring it all the way down to the depth of this tenon and finish it. So I do 2 passes here, then I'll flip it around, do 2 passes here, and then I've gotta basically set the fences up again to get to the bottom, because this 3/8, no, this is actually a 1/2 inch bit, and I'm making a 3/4 groove, so a 1/2 inch will take off of most of it, but then I've got to come back with another setup of the fence to Okay, so I finished routing those grooves, and here's the result. Really nice, huh? Not 1,000,000% perfect, but you know, those are, how else would you do that other than if you had a router table? Those are too bulky to really manage and get precision. So those lines are fine. The groove is 3/4, but nice and flat to the tenons. All right, now we're on to cutting the legs, the tenons for the legs. I've got 4 legs, and that tenoning jig was able to take the 4x4s if I used my clamping trick. So I've got to make cheek cuts for all 4 sides of all 4 legs. So one side takes off 1/4 inch, the other side takes off 1.25 inches, leaves it with a pretty hefty tenon to go into the feet, making a nice sturdy bench. So I'm just going to be making all these tenon cuts. And my saw blade only goes like, less than 3 inches deep, so I ended up having to hand cut the remainder, but no big deal. Got actually a clip of that, I believe, coming up. But this completes all of my tenoning, at least for the leg assemblies. Trying to figure out how to make the cheek cuts. So now that I've made all my cuts, the table saw, I actually did figure out a way. I set up an outfeed table and was able to make all those shoulder cuts. That'll save me a lot of time. I tried using my really fancy Lee Nielsen cross-cut saw, but that just wasn't working right, and actually with setting up the fence and cutting all those cuts actually ended up being a lot cleaner in that way. So I'm just using this Japanese saw. It's very thin curved, so I'm being careful to follow the inner part of the tenon so that it's not going all over the place, and it absolutely worked perfectly. That I used that saw has a rip side and a cross cut side, and since I'm going down the grain using the rip side, it goes faster and it behaves better. So just worked through all of the legs, and we'll just go through fast forward on the rest here. And just a little pause in the action here just to show what a little close-up of how good this worked out, how well this worked out. Really, really clean, very little chisel work to do. Nice, consistent size. So I'm very, very happy with how that turned out. Okay, so here we're done making the tenons. There's 4 leg tenons. The the gable ties, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those. So that makes 12 tenons. There's 4 on the trestle ties. That's 16. Yeah, that's a lot of tenons. So I somehow feel like the tenons are the easy part. The mortises might be a little bit more difficult. But you can see on those trestle ties, I didn't show it in this video, but I did make the curves and cut out the 1-inch reveal at the bottom and made that groove. So really, that was the most sophisticated piece of wood I've cut to date. Next coming up is the mortising, and I did get a standing drill press to see if I can help with mortising. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.